What's the solution to increasing fertilizer costs and supply chain disruptions, especially if you want highly nutritious garden grown vegetables? Hey, I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. Over there is a pile of rabbit manure. It's been sitting about a month. And what we're going to set up is a small composting area. You have to join the mailing list because I'm just going to show you what we're doing to solve this fertilizer problem. But we're going to set up a small composting area right there. And we don't even care that there's black locust there, because we're going to dig up that soil. We're going to bring in new materials, and we're just going to keep turning them. Now, we chose that space for the compost pile because it's easily accessible from the gates. Bring in the nutrients, or bring them around up this center spine, and we spread this. This is the result of rabbit manure and bedding. Old plant pots, they're just thrown in there. That's why you see the perlite in there. And we're simply going to top dress the beds. Now, my guide for top dressing beds is to take all the manure you have, or all the compost you have, and spread it over all the beds you have. It is better to have a thin layer of highly nutritious, biodynamically grown or biologically active compost put over the maximum square footage of your beds than to have a lot in one space, because I'd rather have a 10% improvement on all the plants than a 100% improvement on few plants. Does that make sense, folks? So what we're doing, remember when we designed these beds, we have these contour access points. So we come up this ramp in the middle, bring a wheelbarrow manure. Now you can run a riding lawnmower up that center path and bring the manure closer, but essentially we're gonna get the manure out here and we're gonna spread it. We're just throwing it over as much bed as possible. Now we're throwing it right on top of the cover crop that's starting to get killed by the winter. That's okay. We've got peas in there. We've got different types of biomass in there. We've got daikon radishes. Now, am I gonna do this on the beds at the top? No. I'm gonna focus on the beds that are the least productive. And again, spreading all of the manure we've got over as much area as possible. We do that for two very important reasons. Number one, if your manure is not completely cured and you're doing this in the fall, as you're spreading it over the widest surface, it'll start getting incorporated into the soil. The local biology will take care of anything that hasn't cured all the way. Number two is, again, like I mentioned before, I'd rather a 10% improvement on everything than 100% improvement on a small slice. Okay, because we want to, again, build up that biomass. Now, could we have increased our productivity, our nutrients in the soil, eliminate the need for outside fertilizers just by cover crops? You're certainly right, we can. So you can see the cover crops on these beds is quite dynamic. Now, right now it's getting matted down by the snow, so it's not going to mind a little spread of compost on it. There's a third reason, by the way. If you put the compost lightly, top dress everything, and by the way, I got all these fields to do. If you top dress everything, you don't have to worry about killing the cover crop, because we still might get some time out of this particular cover crop here. But again, I'm fertilizing everything. And then the cover crop will grow up between it. It'll protect the compost that we put down. It'll protect the enzymes, the microbes, and all the creatures that are in there, and ultimately give us higher productivity. Now, you may notice there's some areas where we have grass rather than cover crops. Well, are we going to avoid fertilizing that because we don't want grass to grow? Again, we don't really care. Now, we do use a little bit of tillage here because we're still leveling out some beds. You can see these lower terraces are going to get widened. And so we're still using some light tillage, maybe 1 inch to 3 inches. So things like these grasses and such, we're just going to rip those out of the ground, cutting down about 3 inches. That's not going to impact the deep roots that our cover crops are providing to us. But again, as the rain falls, water travels on this contour trail, and you can kind of see it there. All the beds are level on the top. So what's going to happen is going to soak and spread. The manures, the compost is all going to get liquefied in some sense. So the nutrients are going to leach into the soil. Those long, deep roots from our cover crops are going to then take that nutrient down in the soil. And then when we till it to clean up the beds just before we go to plant, we're not tilling under anything. We're simply just stirring up the first 1 to 3 inches to give us some kind of mulch on the top layer. So our compost You don't have to nice and neat, spread it all around and then till it in and make it all look all pretty. We want to have a blanket of organic matter growing on the soil at all times. Our nutrients can be layered in very thin layers, you know, under an inch. Again, all the compost we have on all the beds we've got. That way we've got just very thin, we can still see through it. And you can literally just sling it on there. Because we have the water management, and you can see the terraces over there, because we have the water management, because we have the level, the contoured trails, because we have the level beds, all of that together is helping us incorporate as much nutrient as possible. Now you might be saying, Justin, when I buy that commercial stuff, there's a risk of me spreading it thin like that and it evaporating the nitrogen or water coming and washing away my nutrients. That's not a problem with organic material because the majority of our organic material is literally organic material. Our nutrients are bound within the wood chips and the other waste that's in here. It's all organic waste. We have branches and you know, crop residue. In some cases, we lay the crop residue on the beds like that. Those are wildflowers right there. But in other cases, that crop residue is just gathered up, piled up, and then turned into compost. Now, folks, look at these beds. Could you take and make sure you have the right amount on every square inch? And no, if you want to go big, you got to go ahead and get and understand nature. So we spread that compost, we spread that manure on the widest possible spot. We have these contour trails to catch and spread the water so that we don't run off any of our nutrients. We have the cover crops in place to keep that soil in place, to hold that soil where it needs to be. We use shallow tillage, if any tillage, because, you know, if we flail mow this, if this grows up, it's about 1 foot, 2 feet high in the spring, and we flail mow it, we could just broad fork it to loosen up the soil because all that material on the top is going to insulate the soil. It's going to feed the soil. It's going to feed the biology in the soil. And let me show you an example of some crop residue. You can see here, I scooped the loose material off the top of the bed. There are chicken feathers in there. And we just got all that crop residue aside. And then we're digging into this nice, rich, healthy, now it's manure. It's not raw manure. We're not spraying liquid piss on there like you might do in a pig operation. I grew up in southern Maryland and down there in St. Mary's County, and the good old Vallandigham farm. It was a Reeves farm, but the Vallandighams used to live in this house, and they used to put liquefied manure on the fields. Now we're not talking about that. All of our nutrients are suspended in organic matter. So we have materials broken down in here. Now, do we have to worry about hot cycles? Okay, so now we're at farm scale. If this was your backyard, you'd turn this pile 2 or 3 times, get it up to 150 degrees, and kill all those seeds. Now in this situation, we still want to turn the piles. We still want to age the piles because we don't want to put hot manure on. Now, rabbit manure is not hot. You don't have to worry about it. You can just lay it in a pile for a little bit, turn it once or twice, and then put it on the field. But if this was cow manure, if this was other types of herbivore manure, you would want to turn it a few times. Now, when you've got 2, 3, 4, I got a place in the back, I'm going to move probably 3 cubic yards of this stuff. When you've got that much, you just turn it with a bucket a couple times on a tractor. But here you can see how rich and nutritious this is. And you might be saying, well, Justin, you got an uncovered pile of manure here. What if it rains? Well, if it rains, look how we've designed the structure so that the rainwater will just soak and spread any of this manure runoff. So this particular area will bring in the raw rabbit manures, chicken manures, cow manure. Now the cow manure has been sitting out in the field, but we scrape it up every so often, bring it in here. We're going to turn it at least 3 times to get a hot cycle. So it'll come in right here where I'm pointing right now. It'll turn over to here, then it'll turn over one more time, and then I'll take this last pile here and spread it out on the fields. Now, if you're spreading in the fall, it can be a little hot because, again, we're taking all the manure, all the compost we have, and spreading it over all the garden we have. So you're going to have a small amount in each area. But if it is hot, turn it at least 1 hot cycle to kill as much of that weed and seed as possible. Your cows, your goats, your chickens, your rabbits, all going to eat stuff. that we don't want growing in the garden necessarily. But what we're going to do here is we're going to put the manures out in the fall. We're going to put them out on fields that have heavy cover crop. We're going to spread it even across the whole field so that we again have a 10% improvement over all of our square footage of growth rather than 100% improvement over a small area growth. Now, some of this stuff we could take into a third or fourth hot cycle and turn it into potting soil to pot up our plants, because there is a nursery here. But again, it really depends on what you're doing. Now, if you don't have these kinds of materials, what should you do to feed your gardens? Well, I've secured horse manure for people from equestrian centers. I've secured rabbit manure. Sometimes you go volunteer to clean out the rabbit cages and to clean out the rabbit area, and they'll let you keep all the manure. Go figure. And then you only need to load it once. Load it from under the rabbit coop, the rabbit cages, into the back of a truck or into a wagon, and bring it on down and pile it up. Now, in the fall, you could put this right on the garden. It's no big deal. You're not going to hurt anything. But again, we want that hot cycle. I got a whole program on composting made easy at farm scale, homestead scale. But you want to have this stuff turned, burned, hot, as far as the thermophilic composting, so that those microbes get activated. The microbes in there then spread over the widest area of your property for your gardening growing spaces. Then you get that first rain, you get that first snow, and it will soak that beauty right down into the soil and feed the roots of your plants and feed the microbes, and you will have an amazing garden growth. And I'm just getting so excited about it. But again, this stuff doesn't spread itself. So once it's finished up, and you can take out all the woody materials, usually all this woody crop residue stuff is the bottom of the next pile. So we'll throw new material on top of it. And yes, you can enhance this with air tubes under the ground, everything, but again, it doesn't need all that. But again, the bedding, the manures, everything together, turn it a couple times, then you take it out immediately, wheelbarrow, wagon, cart, doesn't matter. Get out there and sling it in the garden. Now, if you're careful with the tools, kids love this part because you can just sling it in the garden. I sling it on all the growing spaces, and I try to give it as much square footage as possible. Spread that stuff out because, again, we're feeding the entire system. We're feeding the soil microbes. We're feeding the enzymes that are on the plant leaves. We're feeding the microbes under the soil. We're feeding the microbes in the roots. We're feeding the plants themselves so they can grow great, thick root systems. And overall, we are feeding the people who are involved in this. If you want to get involved and get some experience doing this kind of thing, then click the link below. Visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org. Get on our mailing list. Send in your questions, and we'll tell you how there are learning opportunities where you can have hands-on experience, good exercise, good knowledge, good information, hands-on experience on handling manures in order to use it as fertilizer. We don't need any imported fertilizer. This stuff's full of phosphorus, nitrogen, all that NPK stuff, but much, much more. We'll show you hands-on. We'll get your homestead, small farm, or estate up and running, strong, feeding your family, feeding your health, feeding your community and well-being. I want to thank you for watching. Again, I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead.